Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
Salisbury City Council President Jack Heath is running for Wicomico County Executive. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Heath made it official this month and is expected to challenge incumbent Republican Bob Culver. But Heath is an independent and had to gather enough signatures to appear on the ballot. That's 1% of the registered voters in Wicomico County. Heath is no newcomer to local politics. He lost to Jake Day, who won a seat on the City Council in 2013. Then he was appointed to serve out the term of Terry Cohen when she left the council, and eventually won a seat representing the 3rd District on the council. His background on the Eastern Shore also includes Lower Shore Enterprises that helps people with training and finding them work, and he is in our studio this morning. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Don. Nice to be here.
So the elections like this with an incumbent are generally speaking referendums on the incumbent. So why is it that somebody should say vote for you as opposed to, say, Bob Culver, who some might say, well, he's done okay by me. Why should I vote for the alternative?
Well, I think alternatives are good. Number one, I think competition is always good. But I do believe that I can bring things to the table that maybe he can't. And the best thing about my choice to run is that I have experience now. People have seen how I operate. They know me as a person and as an individual. And I think they get a good understanding of where I'm coming from. One of the things that I've prided myself on is that I'm a fairly good communicator. And I think that's important. I don't think you can run an effective government unless you can communicate with your constituents, and in this case, with the county council. And I'm committed to doing that. We've seen what it can do in the city when we have good communication among both branches of the government, and I think that the citizens certainly enjoy that.
Are you saying essentially that Bob Culver doesn't have that?
No, I'm not. I'm not gonna take the bait of going after. I
mean, you can see our contrasts, right?
Yeah, I would rather tell you what I can bring to the party, and I think that that's the way I hope to run my entire campaign. But I know that I can bring things to the party that will make it much easier to achieve the potential for the county.
Because one of the things actually that Culver has said that he actually had a meeting with a couple of the council members. They had a meeting once they came to the office and never returned. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of communication going on there. How are you going to get them to come back, as it were?
Well, I think the key to anything is sit down and say, okay, listen, are our goals the same? And I believe they are. I know most of the guys on the council. I know some of them very well and some of them not so well. But I do believe, in speaking with them, that they have the best interests of the county in heart. And I think as long as you have a common goal like that, you can work things out. But you have to be willing to sit and talk. And you have to, at times, be willing to negotiate and to compromise. Everything is not black and white. There's a lot of gray in the areas, and I think that that's another thing that I bring to the party through my business experience. I've had a lot of experience negotiating contracts and deals, and I think that that would be a great asset as well.
Have you, by the way, talked to members of the county council about your run or about the politics involved?
Yes, I told them, and
what was the reaction?
The reaction was fairly good. I think that they're looking for that communication. I think that they want to communicate and jointly with the county executive make the county a better place to live. And you can't I don't believe you can do that independently.
Do you think that the county is well run?
I think we have great people in the county. I think that as we do in the city. I think that people know their jobs. You know, good executives do two things. They surround themselves with good people, and then they keep their mouth shut, get out of the way, and when they need resources, provide those resources to them. Anytime that I had success in business, and I give a lot of credit to my staffs that I've had in different at different companies, but they were as big a part of the success of the business as I was, because I let them do their jobs, and when they needed something, I would respond.
So, in terms of, I've heard you talk about efficiency, bringing efficiency to government, particularly in terms of not, for instance, having to raise taxes or increase revenue. And I've heard similar words like that before in terms of trying to streamline government. Waste, fraud, and abuse, I think, is one of those classic lines. And then when people get into government, there's not much to do, or it doesn't really happen. Or maybe it was a nice phrase, but it didn't match reality. What kind of efficiencies do you see bringing to the Wicomico County government?
Well, I think the best example I can give you is something we've done in the city. In conjunction with the mayor, there's been a restructuring and reorganization of several departments. And the other day we had a ribbon cutting for a one-stop shop. And what does that mean? That means that when someone comes in and applies for a permit, they used to have 6 different areas they would have to go to in order to get that approval. As of about 2 weeks ago, there's one place where you go. There's one person that can deal with all of the components of that permit to make sure that the time period is the shortest possible. We haven't eliminated any positions, but what we have done is become much more efficient, shorten the time, which means that the revenue that can be generated by the people who are seeking the permits will come to the city faster.
Does it mean some kind of maybe perhaps consolidation of departments, or is it something a little slightly different?
No, I think I can't say for sure, because you have to go in and analyze first. I'm an engineer by degree, so data is what drives me, and I think that the data will tell us where we can go. But let me give you an example, and I think my first thought when I look at the two groups. Let's take, you've got the county and you've got the city, and they each have their own procurement departments. That's fine, but if you combined the concept of bulk purchasing and bulk buying, and you use that power, because obviously we do it with health insurance. I think there are other things that we can do where we can find common grounds, where we can not necessarily readjust the organization structurally, but take advantage of those kinds of things where you can group buy as opposed to individually buying.
So how do you assess, by the way, the budget? I think the budget's something like $133 million. It was at one point, I guess, in 2008, $121 million. Not a large increase, but certainly an increase. Are we spending enough, or is there some need, for instance, to have any kind of revenue increase? And I think there's a fund balance of something like about $39 million.
Yeah. Until you get into the detail and the nuts and bolts, it's hard to say. But looking at it from a 30,000 foot level, let's talk about the surplus first. Usually the surplus is there for a specific reason. The surplus is there to carry us through a time when there's some kind of incident, disruption, etc. In the city, we carry about 3 months. Is what's generally accepted as a reasonable position. The way I look at it is, any more than that, if you have significantly more than that, you're really holding on to the taxpayers' money instead of investing it in some areas that could bring a return on investment. I tend to look at things more from a business point of view when it comes to the budget side of it. So I think that needs to get looked at, for sure. I think that there are other areas that are really key and we have to look at. When I came down here in the 80s, I believe we were number 5 in the state in education. And if you look at it now, We're second from the bottom, I believe, as of the last rating and ranking system. When you look at the total picture and quality of life, when I came down here, and probably when you came in, the first thing you'd said was, what is the school system like? What's the quality of life here? And that's what attracts businesses, because if you can't attract the people, you can't attract the businesses. So I think that that's important, and I think we need to keep our eye on that and not lose sight of it.
You talked, by the way, about attracting businesses. How would you do that? I know, for instance, a number of predecessors in terms of certainly the mayors and some of the council people have said, well, what we need to do is have some kind of tax breaks, enterprise zones, give breaks to business. On the other hand, that can also be sort of candy that's being handed out, and the business, they're going to move here anyway. That's just sort of a dessert.
Well, I think it depends on what the business is and what the potential is for that business. Right. I'll give you an example. When Firestone came down here years and years ago, and then Occidental purchased them, the reason that the guy came down was because he liked the Eastern Shore of Maryland. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that we have something that no one else has, and then your incentives can be a little bit different, a little bit less. I'll give you an example. High-speed broadband. High-speed broadband allows you to attract a certain level of business that you could not attract if you didn't have it. So in those particular cases, it's in conjunction with, and I call them short-term, not long-term incentives. But things like manufacturer tax inventory, that's all positive things, because that encourages the businesses to invest. And some of the businesses, there's a business in town, a manufacturer in town, that has invested $3 million each of the last 2 years. And I don't know if they would have done that had they not had the exemption to do those things.
How much of an exemption do you think is worthwhile before it finally says, hey?
You know, it's a return on investment calculation.
Yeah.
What size is the business? What does their return look like? What has been their profitability? And then you have the unknown ones, which are very difficult, which are the entrepreneurs that want to start up a business, and they have to get going. Incentives for startups is another whole area, because there's a tremendous amount of young talent in Salisbury University, and we're starting to see that talent with the Shark events and everything else. And we need to give them a hand where we can. So this housing incentives that we put in, et cetera, those are the kinds of things that are going to help us. But like anything else, the quality of life issues, you need a safe environment, you need jobs, you need a good quality education, and then the rest will follow, and has.
I want to turn to education, because one of the things that certainly the current county executive, Bob Culver, said is that he doesn't want to put money into buildings so much as he wants to put money into programs. What's wrong with that approach, or is it wrong?
Well, I'll tell you my approach. My approach is simple. I was a teacher for a few years before I got into manufacturing. My wife was a teacher. My two daughters are teachers, and we all agree. We had a discussion about it. The environment in which the students learn is as important as the curriculum and the teachers who teach them. I don't think it's anybody that's ever walked into or tried to teach in a trailer can tell you that it is different and is a different feeling than there is when you're in a classroom that can be set up, established, and made warm and comfortable. It's very difficult to do that in a portable. So I think it's a balance. I think all of the components that make up the education system, the ability to control this class size. We have overcrowded schools. We have schools that are in bad shape. We do. We have new schools, which is great. They're functioning and they're doing well. But I think it's a complete package. You cannot isolate the difference between facilities, teachers, and curriculum.
Because one of the things, as a matter of fact, Culver said that about Bennett High School. He says, at Bennett High School, Test scores went down after an $80 million school was built. That's not where the problem is. What's wrong with that view?
Well, I think that that's a sort of an oversimplification of what the issue really is. You have to understand that when I was in school, when you were in school, it was a little different than it is currently. The students have totally different distractions that they have to deal with. They have, in some cases, the home unit is not the same as it was back then. Sitting down to a dinner at night as a group is different. Very rarely is that done anymore. And I think all of that impacts, as well as the frustration that teachers have with disruptive behavior in the schools, et cetera. And I think that those kinds of things are being addressed, but it's going to take time because it's not something you can shut off overnight.
So one of the things, though, by the way, you've dealt with the city, but there's also this large rural area.
Right.
And I saw that you mentioned that you didn't know as much about the rural areas
Right.
as the cities, and that you were going to go out and listen to people over the next year.
Right.
Well, so one of the questions, of course, Bob Culver obviously has lived outside the city. He's familiar with the rural areas. What don't you know, or what is the process of you being able to catch up on those issues in terms, obviously, about the incumbent, but how do you deal with the conflicts that are going to perhaps exist between the rural areas and the city? I mean, I'm reminded, matter of fact, Greg Bassett wrote a piece recently where there's only one county council member that really represents Salisbury for the most part, and that the rest of them are somewhere else. That creates a real stress and strain.
Well, I don't understand that.
Go ahead.
I will tell you why I don't understand it. Over 50% of the people that work in the county work in the city. We have our population goes up to over 100,000 people during the daytime. I don't think any of those people, and I don't, as a citizen of the city, I don't think any differently when I cross the city lines into the county. When I go to Winter Place Park, when I go to Pemberton, when I go down towards the Pocomoke Forest, and I go to Tall Tales and Parson, I don't think, "Oop, I'm out of the city now," and I don't think people think that coming in. I personally think that what is good and positive in the city, for instance, the marathon that's coming, and the folk festival, everybody in the county is going to benefit from that, from the economic impact of that thing. So I struggle with that. When I refer to not being familiar with the county, I'll give you an example. In the city, before we did that, we had two districts. We had District 1 and we had District 2. And at the time when we did that, we had 3 council people living within a 5-block radius of the same area of the city. When we went to the 5 districts, we now have 5 distinct areas in the city, and it's amazing how different the dynamic on the council has been, and the input and the way that items are brought up, because now you have somebody, I'm living on the southern end, Mir's living in the middle, April's over on the one end, Jim is over in Newtown. All different and we're just living in the city, and there are so many different issues that affect each of those districts. Now put that on a county scale. The people, for instance, in Mardella are worried about the washout roads.
Right.
Well, the people in Mardella are worried about that as a significant issue. The people in Parsonsburg and Pittsville may have totally different issues that are 60-foot road. Those kinds of things. So when I say that I'm very familiar with the neighboring areas, partially because I was a volunteer fireman and we got to know Hebron, Parsonsburg,
Right.
Fruitland, you know that part of it.
Right.
But there are areas that I want to get to know and find out what are your particular specific things in your area that really impact you that you'd like to see addressed.
Chris, one of the things I'm struck at, and things just recently, I think within the last few years, or whatever, there's been some agreement about the differential in terms of taxation, in terms of the services that the city provides as opposed to the county, and so on and so forth. But that took a long time for the issue to be resolved. For years, both under Republican as well as Democratic majorities on that council, they said, no, we're going to keep our money. How do you see the relationship now between the county and the city? I mean, is it to overcome these kinds of differences?
Well, I think that issue still remains,
right.
By the way.
Yeah.
I mean,
it hasn't completely resolved. But
yeah, but I think that we have to look at it from, I'll say, the logical point of view.
Mm-hmm.
If someone asks you to pay for something twice, you buy a car and they're going to charge you double for the car, for instance.
Right. That's the city's argument, right?
Right. Now, the other argument is, well, we should get a differential for all the taxes. Well, that's not right either.
Hmm.
It's the practicality of it is we should pay for what the services that we receive from the county. We should share in that for those services that are provided to the people. The services that are duplicate, where we have our own blank,
right.
We shouldn't pay for them twice. Now, we are the last county in the state of Maryland that doesn't have, and I'm not going to call it tax differential, because there are other ways of doing it. There's stipends, there's grants, and there's many ways of doing it. But we are the last one in the state of Maryland that doesn't have any form of that.
Why do you think the county's been so reluctant?
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, aside from the fact that we obviously lose money, right?
Yeah.
It's a
well,
cash thing, right?
You do lose money, but it doesn't have to necessarily be money. There's services that could be, when they're paving a road, where the county ends and the city ends. Well, maybe what we do is, while they're still going, you keep going and do the road, because then it actually costs less money in the long run, and you keep track of those. That's an administrative problem,
right?
And potential problem. But I think that we have to look at all aspects of the thing and then make a decision about it.
By the way, I need to ask you about the revenue cap. Did you think that was a good idea? I mean, obviously it hasn't changed, and we'll see how the budget goes. I mean, it may not change it, but is that a good idea to have a revenue cap like that?
I wouldn't have been in favor of it. I wasn't here at the time. That's when I was out of state. I think it's dangerous. I think it can be dangerous if we don't know what's going to come. And in order to get rid of it, besides it next to an act of God,
right?
It's going to be very, very difficult. But I think it was a frustration that, at least from what my daughter told me when I was away, it comes from a frustration of people constantly being hit with increases, and not small ones. And I think that's something that they decided was the right thing to do. The referendum went out, and it's here now, so we have to deal with it.
One other issue, by the way, that's come up, which is sort of interesting, which is we have this plaque in downtown Salisbury for this Confederate general, who apparently, amongst other things, is fairly notorious in terms of the prisons, John Winder. And everybody's been talking about it. Matter of fact, when I saw this issue come up, it seemed like some of the folks in the city kicked it to the county, and the county then kicked it to somebody else, and so on and so forth, as if it's this orphan. What's your own feeling about that plaque?
Someone asked me about that the other day.
Yeah.
And I'm torn. I'll be honest with you. I'm torn. And that's what I told the person, because the other thing that you'll find out about me is, if I believe in something and I go for it 100%, but there are other things that are not the simplest things to do. And let me see if I can put my thoughts in. First of all, the plaque, in my opinion, should never have been put up. Having said that, it was put up. And then I thought about it, because it became an issue. To be honest with you, I never even read the plaque. All the years I lived here, I never read the plaque. And then the whole disruption started to come, and I thought about it, and I said, isn't it strange that there's that plaque there, but Frederick Douglass doesn't have a plaque when he gave his speech down on the courthouse. I think at the very least we should put a Frederick Douglass plaque up there. Having said that, though, then I started thinking a little bit further, and I said, this guy was an absolute terror. You know, how many thousands of people he had killed. Now that I look at that plaque, I think about, you know, when I look at that plaque now, I say, this is what happens in wars. And this is what happens when people who are not of sound mind take advantage and treat humanity in the way that he did. And I think there's a value to that in a sense, and it's sort of strange. I can remember when I was in high school and we were doing history, and I had my best friend was Jewish, and we were talking about Auschwitz, and we were talking about the concentration camps, and I had asked him, I said, you know, doesn't that the German people, and his family was German, I said, don't the German people and you, don't you feel, you know, that's always there? And he goes, it's there for a reason. It's there so that we don't forget. Now, people have said to me, oh, you can't compare. Well, no. In terms of scale, you can't compare. But in terms of feeling and sensitivity, I think you can.
Do you think something should be added to the plaque, or should just be removed? I mean,
I'm
to
right,
your very point about how awful this.
If they want to move it to where he was born, I don't have an issue with it. If it stays there, it's not going to.
Right.
It's not going to bother me. It's actually. I think that just by the mere fact we're paying more attention to him, just irritates me. It really does. It really irritates me. And I understand where there's a group of people that are coming from. I absolutely do. And but it's to me, that's my sense of it.
But one of the corollaries to that is, of course, you know that we had a lynching in downtown Salisbury in 1931.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, I had one of the bloggers who actually supports keeping the Winder flag, the Winder plaque up, but said, "Oh, it's fine if you put up a one for to talk about the lynching." You think that something should be noted there of what happened to remind us of, so we don't forget?
I think there's groups that have made us aware of it.
That's right.
And I think that if that's one of their foundations for their group, they should keep reminding us because it is important. Putting up a plaque. We could have plaques surrounding the entire courthouse. But I think the important thing is what comes out of it, how are we going to deal with it as a society in town? I don't think that there's very many people that today would say that any of those things that are represented by are worth our time. I think that let's move on because those people, hopefully those people and that kind of thinking don't exist.
You do think it still does?
Oh,
what do you think?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Well, what do you do about it?
Well, I think that you do things like last night I was at the NAACP delegation. There was a decent amount of people there, but I think the dialogue, I think everybody feels good about the dialogue that comes out of those kinds of sessions, and I think that there's a lot of churches in town that are trying to do those things. I just wish more people would take part in them, to hear what other people have to say, a different opinion.
We've been speaking with Salisbury City Council President Jack Heath. He is running for Wicomico County Executive, and we appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us this morning.
Thank Don. My pleasure.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pac 14.